Hello and welcome to this Q&A from the Fertility Alliance. Today we are very lucky to be joined by Katy from the Miscarriage Association, who's joining us to talk a bit about miscarriage support. So Katy, I wondered if you could start by telling us about your role at the Miscarriage Association and what you do.
Yeah, sure. And thank you so much for having me. So, I am the training and research lead at the Miscarriage Association. So, essentially, I deliver the training to organisations, big and small. And the aim is to really raise awareness about how employers can better support people going through this. And I'm also leading some research projects. So, for example, we're looking at training healthcare professionals. So, one of the things that I've done within the team, with team input, of course. So, we've been putting together a survey just to find out their needs, and what they actually feel that they would like to learn more about, for their specific roles in healthcare, because obviously it's unique, isn't it, that they're dealing with delivering that news potentially. And then the other thing I do is I create content for the Miscarriage Association because I'm doing a PhD in this area. And so I can use that research to inform, updating their materials and different resources as well.
Really important work. I wanted to stop asking you, we're always told that miscarriage is really common, but what actually are the statistics?
Yeah, I mean, it's really shocking when people come to the statistics, I think, because of the silencing around it. So it's estimated that one in four pregnancies end in loss, but specifically miscarriage, it's estimated that one in five pregnancies end, in early pregnancy loss in miscarriage in its various forms. So yeah, it's really prevalent, much more than what people often realize.
Do you think because of that, people sometimes underestimate quite what a huge impact it has?
Yeah, I do. A lot of the people I've interviewed in this area, they've said, because it is so common, they wonder if that's why for example, their healthcare experience, wasn't as not as kind of emotionally or empathetic, and people taking time with them and really helping them to process this as a legitimate grief. So that's quite common, people saying that the language used in healthcare might be quite cold, and you might feel a bit rushed. And I think a lot of that is because of the prevalence, and healthcare professionals, they are dealing with this on a daily basis, But then it's also really shocking because we don't talk about it very much in everyday discourses. I think people are really shocked that, oh, wow, this is really, really common. And I just can't believe, that I've now disclosed to people, that, friends, family. And then there's almost like a dual disclosure, and they just can't believe that other people have been through it. And yeah, just how common it is.
I wanted to talk to you a bit about what happens when miscarriages combine with fertility issues, because we know it can feel as if that is just really too much to bear. Do you think that getting the right support can actually make a difference?
100%, because I think it's such a lonely experience going through pregnancy loss anyway. But when it's combined with fertility struggles, maybe fertility treatment, the literature describes it as this double whammy of grief. And it doesn't sound like a very professional term, but I really like it because I think, yes, you do. You go through, obviously the grief of, losing, potentially the opportunity because, financially, maybe physically, you might feel unable to go through treatment again, certainly emotionally. And then, yeah, it's just trying to, cope with the loss of potentially your fertility. Maybe that's through, if you've had endometriosis or a diagnosis, like that, and you might feel, okay, this has really prevented my chance anyway. But when you have had that successful treatment and then that baby is lost, it's the gearing up to go through it all again. Can you physically go through it emotionally, financially, can you actually afford to go through it? So I think sometimes people hear, oh, you can just try again. But when you've been through fertility treatment, and I don't need to, preach to you, this is your specialist field. But it's actually not that easy. And it's not easy anyway to try to conceive again. But if you have to go through fertility treatment again, that's a huge thing to go through. Um, so yeah, I do really think with the right support, it can help. So just having kind of like broad counselling isn't always the best, we're hearing from people in the research. Actually, a more specialist type of counselling, where we've got the counsellors are actually trained within this and they recognise it as a legitimate grief, because it is. And I think we shy away from it, sadly.
I wanted to ask you a bit about the investigations for miscarriage, because one thing people are often quite shocked about when they talk to us about it is the fact that there often doesn't seem much appetite to investigate the cause until you've had more than one miscarriage. And why is that?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. We're quite lagging behind really in the research in this area. So yeah, there is a postcode lottery with it as well. So some trusts, it may be that you do receive, some testing after two miscarriages. It may be that they have to be in a row, which, doesn't seem fair. And then some trusts actually you have to wait until you've had three. So I don't know if you saw the pregnancy loss review that came out last summer, but this is one of the things they're trying to tackle. So they would like to see support from that very first miscarriage. I mean, I'd argue that some of these things and tests, they could be done before, you even try to conceive. I know pregnancy don't always happen in that way, but you know what I mean? Because sometimes you might be diagnosed with a blood clotting disorder, for example, that can be treated and it could have prevented all those heartbreaking losses. But equally, the problem is that we have, so statistically, we know that most miscarriages are a one-off and recurrent miscarriage is more rare. So, they say from a funding kind of perspective, and also because testing often doesn't bring back anything conclusive, so it might be that you don't actually get an answer. So this is why they're saying that they wait. But it does feel rather barbaric that you have to go through this multiple times before you get help. It just doesn't seem, fair because that emotional effect on people and the physical, you know.
It's very difficult, I think, if you don't know what happened and why, because there's often a tendency to think it must be something that you actually did yourself. I mean, how likely is it that you could actually have done something that would make a difference?
I mean, so I follow the work of Professor Leslie Reagan. She's, a leading expert in this area. And I really like what she says because she speaks about how seldom do lifestyle choices, habits, exposures, answer why miscarriages happen. And I really like that because we hear so often, don't we, people self-blame because they don't get the answers, like you say, they go looking for answers. It's human nature, we want to find the cause so that we can prevent it in the future, But actually, she says, no, I think there was a study that recently came out and they um, were saying that up to 95% of miscarriages are caused by chromosomal abnormalities. So, in other words, nothing we could have ever controlled. But yeah, that self-blame is really apparent, isn't it? And I do think it's because people um, feel that pregnancy is controllable. If we do everything right, we follow all the guidance, tick these boxes, take your folic acid, um, just all sorts of things like avoiding certain foods, then it kind of makes it feel as though, oh, I must have not followed that rule book. But, actually, what we know is most could never have been prevented. There wasn't anything that, you did wrong.
That's really heartening to know. I think the other thing that we hear a lot is that partners can get really overlooked when it comes to miscarriage, and everyone is very focused on the person who's had the miscarriage, and that the emotions of the partner are sometimes not considered. I mean, do you find that is the case?
Yeah, it's a shame, but actually, I would say that they're experience is minimized and bypassed because we're really just focusing on the person that's physically, lost the pregnancy. And that starts in healthcare, really. So lots of partners who I've, interviewed or worked with, they've said, oh, the doctor didn't even look at me or acknowledge that I was even there. So yeah, what we know from research is that often partners experience miscarriage, as a grief and they go through the same feelings and on the same level, as their partner that's physically miscarried. But we just don't really talk about it very much and we don't have very much support in place. So then what we know is that often partners kind of feel unable to speak out because they feel, well, it didn't happen to me, so I should not moan, and they're the ones often doing the sort of practical jobs, just to kind of get through and to help their partner. But then that can lead to delayed grief and it can also lead to mental health illness. And, we talk about male mental health a lot, don't we? We know statistically there's a huge issue, but my argument is we're not looking at reproductive issues and how that can affect men. So, not just pregnancy loss, but also infertility and childlessness as well. So, yeah, all of these things are just really, really key. But I think that we're not acknowledging them as, issues that can be associated with mental health. I'd say as well, also same-sex couples, there's not very much research in this area, as you can imagine, but actually they can feel quite segregated and face, stigma and stereotypes. And that can be because, often the resources, they speak to people as though they're in a heterosexual couple, married. There's kind of these expectations. And actually, it may be then that prevents them from seeking support. Um, but yeah, I've met people who have said, oh, it started in healthcare when we went up to the hospital and I was asked, oh, well, which one's mum? And those kind of things that actually people don't mean any malice by, but it again kind of reinforces that, this is not a normal situation and it can really disenfranchise that grief. So yeah, we need more work in that area, I'd say.
In terms of support, are there things that people can say that are supportive and helpful? Because I think often people don't say anything because they don't know what to say and they're worried about saying the wrong thing. But what are the kind of, from your work, what are the helpful things that people can say?
Yeah, so a really good tactic to use, and I've actually borrowed this from counselling, so I haven't invented this, but it's a term called mirroring, and it's really powerful because actually what we know is miscarriage can affect people differently. So some people may not even describe, the loss as the loss of a baby. Most people do, but some people, it might be a coping mechanism, or it might actually be how they perceive, their loss. So if they're using the term baby, we give that back to them. They might use the baby's name, they might say child, but equally they might say fetus or pregnancy. So it's a really good idea to use those terms back with someone. And regardless of how they view what they've lost, it's really validating to just say, I'm so sorry for what you're going through. I'm so sorry for your loss. It's just really empowering. And so many people say to me, I wish that that's what, I'd had the response, rather than someone avoiding me or trying to patch it up and make it better, which, I know as humans we do, and it's well intentioned. But in this case, it's not a good idea to give people those unless they bring them to you, so if they bring to you, um, I want to remain really positive, I want to try again, and I believe this will be a one-off, then you can mirror that back to them. But it's not good to just respond with, anything that could be minimizing, when people sort of say at least, that's a really common one we come across.
I was going to ask you about that, the other side of the coin. What are the things you should try to avoid saying?
Yeah, so anything starting with at least, so at least, you can get pregnant, at least it was early, gestational week. What we know is that it often has no reflection on the level of grief experienced. Rather, it's the attachment to the pregnancy, which can begin before you even try to conceive, can't it? You might have ideas about names or schools or hobbies that you want to do. So, it can be really difficult. And when people say anything like, oh, at least you hadn't got attached yet, equally things like, oh, at least you already have a child, as if that takes away your pain that, you've lost a second baby. Um, so yeah, also avoiding anything that I think the term is quite useful in this context. So toxic positivity. So where you're saying, oh well, it wasn't meant to be, or anything along those kind of silver lining. Yeah, it's just kind of making light of the situation. And because in that case, it can really deny people's feelings of, feeling angry, feeling sad. It can really stop them from expressing those feelings, which is important. They should be able to express it. Um, so yeah, equally as you say, ignoring someone crossing the corridor at work or crossing the road. Yeah, but because we do it out of awkwardness, we don't want to say the wrong thing. But what people say in the research is, I'd rather someone tried, rather than just trying to avoid me. It can be just as bad as saying the wrong thing.
Finally, I wondered if you could tell us a bit about the sort of support that you offer at the Miscarriage Association, and particularly around the support for people who've had fertility problems.
So the Miscarriage Association, they are just fantastic. So they offer, a phone line where you can have that one-to-one support with people who understand, they're trained in this area. You can offload, they're strangers in that sense, in a positive way, that you can really express your true feelings to someone you don't have to then see, in your everyday life. So that's really positive. They also have a forum as well that you can turn to. And that can be really good for the peer support, actually, because, there'll be other people in similar situations. They may have gone through fertility treatment, maybe multiple times, and then gone through a loss. And just finding that alliance that you're not on your own, this hasn't just happened to you, is really key. So obviously, as you know, so they run workplace training, and I lead on this. And I think it's really important so that employers know what support that they can offer. So that can be external support, so charities, but also what can they do internally to support somebody going through this? So flexible working, maybe, reasonable adjustments, those kind of things. Um, and yeah, the Miscarriage Association also do a lot of campaigning to really improve just support in this area. So that might be healthcare, might be workplace, society more broadly as well. And it just raises awareness that these are issues that are prevalent and lots of people are going through them. It can just help people feel less alone.
Thank you so much for joining us, Katy, and for explaining a bit more about some of the issues around miscarriage and about the support that the Miscarriage Association can offer. And of course, we're also here for you too at the Fertility Alliance, and you can find more of our Q&As on our YouTube channel. So thank you, Katy.